I didn't learn this on the internet, and it stuck with me my whole life. The capital of Djibouti is Djibouti.
Hello, and thank you for listening to the Maximum Mediocrity Podcast. My name is David Shockley.
And I'm Morgan Miller.
And this is the podcast where we interview people that aren't famous but should be. Joining us today is Dr. Brent Thompson. Brent, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
And just to start off, just to give people an idea of who you are, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do in your history?
Well, I was born in Philadelphia suburb and went to University of Delaware, just sort of accidentally. I had a
Just walked in one day.
Well, pretty much. I had a friend who went there. I was going to a Penn State branch campus looking for a place to transfer to, and she went down there, and I went to visit with her boyfriend and one weekend, and I said, "Oh, this is a nice campus," and so I transferred to Delaware and started as a biology major. Never thought about what I really wanted to do. Thought maybe be a biologist, maybe be in medicine. And I had a roommate who was a biologist, and he was really into it, and I realized I was not really into it. I stayed in Russell C. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the campus of University of Delaware, but on the east side of the school there, it was co-ed, which was pretty radical at the time in the 70s.
Whoa.
My next door neighbor was a nursing major, and she said, "I think you would make a good nurse." And that seemed very funny, particularly in the 70s.
Was her name Penny?
Was this after the title sequence of American Pie?
And so I said I would give it 1 year. I transferred to nursing, and I said I'd give it 1 year. And I ended up really thriving in it and really enjoying it. And after graduation, I went to Children's Hospital in Philadelphia and met my wife there. Both of us worked on the oncology unit at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia.
Yeah. And
we were married not too long after that. And then I started going back to graduate school with the thought that I would become more of a clinical specialist in pediatric oncology, and ended up teaching some lab nursing students their laboratory classes, which is basic skills, is really what you do. And I really liked it. And so I got a master's degree at Delaware while I was continuing to work at Children's. And they ended up hiring me to teach at University of Delaware.
Oh, wow.
And so I worked as an instructor there. I was still going to Children's part-time.
Oh my God.
And then for some reason,
That sounds very busy.
and I'm not quite sure how it all worked out, but I ended up going over down the road to Newcastle County Airport and becoming a flight nurse with the Delaware National Guard. So I was doing all these different things at the same time. And so I've kind of lost track of where I was for a while. I was doing nursing supervision at DuPont Hospital for children and working at CHOP and in the Guard and teaching, and sometimes I'd leave.
You didn't even know who you were working for anymore.
There were literally days when I would come to the end of my driveway and have to remember, do I turn left or do I turn right? Because it would depend on which direction for which day, because I would start to lose track. So I ended up just doing mostly work at University of Delaware and learning about teaching of nurses. I would take nursing students to DuPont Hospital for children, and then I was also in the Air National Guard, which is 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the year, and being in teaching, the summer was easy time to do that. And then we would also fly on weeknights doing training missions, just practicing in the C-130s that you probably go right over your head here sometimes.
They love to ruin the sound. Hopefully none of them come by to say hi right while we're doing this.
It's the sound of freedom, David.
I have also flown in one of those before.
Really? Yeah? How did you get to do that?
I was in a program called CAP,
Yeah,
Civil Air Patrol.
Civil Air Patrol.
Mm-hmm. And when you go to encampment, which is basically just boot camp, you have to go to this boot camp program to proceed in rank, which I'll tell you, 16-year-old Morgan was not thrilled. But that was really cool.
Yeah.
It's super duper loud.
Yes, I have the hearing loss to prove it. So I was in the Air Guard there, and then learning about teaching, and then sort of decided that teaching was really what I wanted to do. But I went in as a nurse.
About what time was this? What year?
This would have been in the late 80s.
Okay.
And
this is only like 10-year time span. You're doing this. Wow.
Yeah, I graduated in 80 from...
Is that all?
I graduated in 80 from University of Delaware, and then got the master's in 85. And then in order to stay in teaching and academia at a 4-year college, it was becoming clear that you needed a PhD. And so Widener was starting a doctorate in nursing education. So I went up the road there. I was living in North Wilmington at the time.
Oh, very convenient for you then.
Yeah, it was very convenient. So anyway, I was able to go up there and get a PhD in nursing education. And then during that early 90s time frame, we adopted our first daughter in 1990, adopted our second daughter in 1992. My wife continued to be a nurse, and in 1990 was the Persian Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And so we were activated as an aeromedical evacuation unit out of Delaware, and I was sent to Saudi Arabia.
That's amazing.
So I spent, but that was a much shorter war. Now we have endless wars. That war was fairly brief. So
right, they were just talking about that. We almost went into war again just the other day.
Yeah, well,
with Iran, and I was like, we were out of that one.
It was
that what was over?
It was just a busy weekend. They couldn't fit it in.
Yeah. So much to do.
Yeah.
My mom was actually a field medic in the Army.
Wow. So our job as a flight nurse was to take the wounded. You've seen MASH on TV, right?
Yeah.
So the idea was to take a patient from the MASH unit and then fly them in the C-130 back to a bigger hospital where they could get more care. So the patients would have to are stabilized in those MASH units, and then flown back at that time in a C-130. They have some different planes that they use now.
Could you imagine? When they get hurt like that, they don't go straight back to work?
No.
All right.
Whew.
I misunderstood. I was going to say, oh my God.
No, they can't. I mean, it depends on your injury. They can if it's minor. But anything that was serious enough to get into our plane, they would probably not be going back to work anytime soon.
They got the pass.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
So let's see, we're up to the early 90s, right? So now getting into the late 90s, I finished my PhD. And
Morgan's learning to walk.
And okay.
Green Day comes out with their debut album.
And I was starting to find out about this fascinating new thing called the internet. And I think it's going to be big someday. Mark my words. And I actually would go around and giving workshops on this thing called the internet.
Really?
And how I think that it might be something you'd want to look into. Things like a web browser were considered really, really exotic and just an amazing thing. I remember I had an email address at University of Delaware, and I was one of the first people that I knew that even had one. So I had nobody to write to because nobody else had one.
You're the guy who had the first telephone.
Yeah. And I was in Sweden. I remember, this was 98. I was in Sweden, and I was going to email back to the University of Delaware, and my dad's like, "Aren't they going to charge you for that?"
Aren't they going to charge you for that?
I'll make a collect email, Dad. Okay.
Yeah. Long distance email.
Right.
Do you accept?
So anyway, that was where I started getting into technology and learning about the idea of sort of changing the way we teach things. I can get into more of that later, but I started getting into this idea that you can't memorize everything. And one of the neat things about the internet is that you have this access to everything all the time. And that was a really remarkable change. For people who are younger, they don't even know about a time when that stuff was not available to us.
Yeah. I only briefly remember a time without internet. I'm 27 years old, and I remember by the time I was probably 2010 maybe was when we got our first computer, and then shortly after that, probably when I was like 11 or 12, that's when we got the internet, and everything was new.
Dial-up or?
It was dial-up, yeah, AOL.
Beep, beep, bang, bang, bang.
Get off the computer!
Yeah.
I need to make a phone call!
Yeah.
You've got mail. I'm actually glad that you brought up the internet because, and about how it does connect us. You always are constantly surrounded by information and you can look up anything at any time. You actually reached out to us because of a post that Morgan had made on Reddit. Is that right?
Yes.
How did you first find out about Reddit?
How do we find out about anything? I don't really remember, to be honest. It was one of those things where I was on another page, or maybe I Google searched and it linked me to a Reddit subreddit, and then I learned about it there. I think I've been on it for about 5 or 6 years.
Man, longer than me.
Yeah, that's about. I think I have 6 years. So you've been on there for quite a while.
Yeah.
What's your favorite part about Reddit?
The fact that you can ask questions and sometimes within minutes get answers to things. You know, I was traveling to England and there was a Ask UK subreddit.
Oh, yeah.
And so I put a few questions on and got answers back, you know, within minutes. And it was just really remarkable that you can have, you know, that stuff it was things that you couldn't look up yourself. And that's the kind of thing I wanted to know about. If you want to know, like, where do you park in some city you're going to? Well, you could do Google searches and get a list of parking lots, but if you do a search on a subreddit, you find the people that live there will tell you, oh, you know, here's where you want to go, here's where you don't want to go. So you get that personal to personal communication, but it's also anonymous too, which is also good and bad sometimes.
Yeah, that's a dangerous combination.
Yeah.
Anonymous people have the worst things to say.
That's what amazes me is the things that get downvoted on Reddit. It's like you put some kind of innocuous thing or a little joke, and like you see you got 8 upvotes and 2 downvotes, and it was like, why did you give this a downvote?
Who's downvoting this?
Right. You're like, you know.
Who's that angry?
Yeah. I like my cat. 8 upvotes, 1, 2 down. Like, what do you mean? you don't like that I like my cat? Okay.
You should only hate your cat.
Your cat's not as cool as my cat.
What's your favorite subreddit?
My favorite subreddit? I think the Ask Me Anything, the AMA, you know, I love when because it gets into that whole thing where you find out details about people who have very specific jobs or interesting lines of work, or people that you may have seen in their celebrity status, but then find out more detail about their lives.
You know what blew my mind? I had like a financial question, and I looked it up on Reddit, and there was just answers. Real people answers to my question.
Yeah. There's a personal finance subreddit that's very good.
Found.
Yeah, so a lot of people who have issues or questions and things like that, or about loans or credits or bankruptcies and things like that, you can get a lot of information on that.
That's a great subreddit. I'm subbed to that one, and I read that all the time. Sometimes I feel bad when I read it because it's people that are in very difficult financial situations.
Oh.
And you just learn like about all this intimate drama about their life, and it's just like, God, I just want to learn more about this person. This sounds juicy.
Yeah.
Why isn't this a TV show yet?
Yeah, it's like I feel bad because they're in really rough spots, but thankfully they have a resource to ask, like, how do I get out of this? And people give real answers and actually give damn good advice.
Some other subreddits I like is Forwards from Grandma.
Yeah.
That one is a lot of memes that somebody's grandmother sent them.
That's hilarious.
And they're usually some horrific political or religious view. Okay, Grammy, thanks for sharing. And so there's that. But what's good about that is, again, it lets you see how the rest of the world is. Because one of the things about Reddit is it skews young, it skews liberal. And so you don't realize, sometimes how the other world is thinking or seeing things until you see those forwards from Grandma.
You're like, Jesus Christ, Grandma.
Yeah.
You get real drunk, go on the Donald.
That's scary sight. That's a scary sight for me. But
I think my favorite subreddit is Grandpa Joe Hate. It's people that have a deep-seated hatred for the grandpa in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Oh, well, that's all valid, I would believe.
I feel very validated. As soon as I found this, I was like, there are others just like me.
He's a horrible person, a horrible
He
human
lays
being.
there for years and years in a bed. They have 2 beds pressed together, and there are 6 grandparents there. And one day the grandkid comes in with a fun prize, and he can just walk all of a sudden.
I think he would have probably had a lot of problems with walking,
Right.
considering how long.
So much muscle loss.
So, right. But he may have been dancing or doing other things when they weren't looking so that he kept up his muscle mass.
He bribes the other grandparents to say anything about this, and I will take your kneecaps.
Right.
And then he just does this great cha-cha routine out of nowhere and just sits back down and just don't say a fucking word. And you!
Remember Six Flags had that old guy that did the dancing? Maybe it was him.
That was him!
Maybe
That was
that's
his
who it
side
was.
gig. When the other 2 parents were working very hard to make that cabbage stew.
Yeah.
Cabbage stew.
My favorite subreddit is bunnies or buttholes.
I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that one.
That you got to check that one out. It's exactly what you think it is. It's like a 50-50 subreddit where you're going to click the link and it's a 50% chance that it's going to be an adorable rabbit or 50% chance that it's just going to be somebody's butthole.
Oh, I think I'll pass on that one.
I imagine you've seen a lot of buttholes in your work.
But I get paid for it. I don't need to do it. I don't need to do it voluntarily. So.
You whore. No, I don't mean to brag, but my cat was Reddit famous.
Oh yeah.
Yes, on curled feetsies.
Oh.
2,000.7 upvotes on my cat.
Very good. The most I ever got for a posting was a picture that I posted that my wife took as a kid in Yellowstone Park of people outside their cars feeding the bears. It was kind of a WTF moment there, which they would throw you out of the park today if you tried that. But at that time, there was just a whole line of station wagons with people feeding this family of bears.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know if there's anything that
Cubs, everything. So
I'm not sure.
Very dangerous.
I'm not sure if there's anything that makes me chuckle more than watching bears walk on 2 legs. They just waddle side to side. It's very cute.
Well, I think it's time to get a shot in us. What do you think?
Sure.
11:30 in the morning. Perfect timing.
Cheers.
Cheers.
11:30 in the morning.
Oh, breakfast.
I had to force myself to eat this morning. I was like, you are consuming alcohol in the morning. You have to eat before this.
Oh, it's already warm.
Right?
Woo. What's your favorite type of bourbon?
Maker's Mark 46.
Ooh, that's a good one. Have you ever had the cigars?
No.
The Maker's Mark cigars?
No.
They're really good, too. I think they dip it in the bourbon.
No, I'm not a cigar
that's kind of
smoker.
interesting.
Yeah, I never got into smoking. When I first started Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, nurses smoked in the nurses' conference room. We would change a report in a room smaller than this, and there would be people smoking. And they sold cigarettes in the lobby of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia.
What is it like being from that time era and knowing what you know now? Does thinking back to what you saw like blow your mind? Or
Well, yeah, it is interesting because when I see people today who get very upset about things that happened in the 70s, oh, you shouldn't have spoken to that person who was a segregationist, for example, that's in the news now. And I said, you didn't live in that time. In Newcastle County, the schools weren't segregated legally, but there was a de facto segregation. And so there was an effort to change it with busing. And so kids that lived in Newark would be bused to Newark, and kids that lived in Wilmington would be bused to Newark, at certain grades. It was very controversial because you had people that lived across the street from a school, let's say in Newark, and then but you don't go to that one. You can't just walk across the street. You have to get on a bus and go to Wilmington, which was over an hour, and it was just logistically. I mean, even if you don't think about the racial implications, just logistically, it was an annoyance for a lot of people, and so.
That sounds annoying.
Yeah, I mean, it had a good motive. It had a good reason for doing it, but the actual system met a lot of resistance. But also things like, and I didn't see this, but my mother or my wife recalls that in the 60s in Westchester, where she grew up, Pennsylvania, the lunch counters were segregated. They didn't have signs. It was just sort of a de facto thing that you should know where you should go. And the movie theater in Westchester, Pennsylvania, right up into the 60s, had a balcony for blacks. But a lot of people don't think of that. They always think, oh, that was some kind of Southern problem, that segregation was something that happened down there. But it was really everywhere. We have awareness now. We're woke now. We understand that it's wrong today. But what I think people have to understand is you cannot go back in time and say, well, you should have known better.
Right.
Because that's just how it was.
Yeah, and changes happen slowly, and they never happen as much as you would want. They never happen to the degree that you want. There's still so much to do in so many areas. But if you didn't grow up in those times like, I did, and then the people before me did, I had advantages of living in a time post-civil rights laws. My parents did not, so.
Yeah. And it's also that, like, right now, there's things going on that we're not aware of as wrong.
Sure. I mean, I would say just in the last year or two, just awareness of trans people and their issues, which, a lot of it was new to me.
I actually used Reddit to learn about trans people.
Exactly. And so I always remind people who always want to criticize us, think your children are going to criticize you about the positions that you hold today. You never, I like to think that things are always getting better, that there's always advancements in things. But I also know that it can be a slow road. Mm-hmm. There can be setbacks. And then, but the overall trend line is going up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You had something to say about that the other day.
Yeah, what I like to say to myself to kind of keep myself positive is it always seems like things are getting worse, but things are always getting better.
Yes.
The more they seem like they're getting worse, they are getting better.
The other thing is I think sometimes setbacks help energize and can help people coalesce their ideas and get together. And sometimes that's how things change, when they start to see the damage that the setback causes where they didn't see it before. Now they're energized to say, oh, let's make things better.
Like one step back, two steps forward?
Yes, exactly.
And you unify with a common enemy.
Right.
Oh, yes.
It's like, well, listen, I know we have our differences, but that's fucked up. We got to do something about that.
That's how I feel about the whole abortion thing right now. I feel like there's been a setback, but there's like this giant mass of people that are coming together and working towards a common goal now.
In what issue?
Abortion.
Oh, abortion. I thought you said awards shows. I'm like, awards shows? Why is that a problem?
Yes, I have strong feelings
I told
about
you
the Grammys.
I told you my hearing was lost from the C-130. Yes.
It's okay.
There is a problem with award shows, too. I think we need to bring that up as well. It's just a nightmare.
Well, beauty pageants, definitely. I don't know why that's why is that a thing in 2019? I don't even understand.
I don't know, man.
They're horrible. There is no reason for it. At a lower, I was doing some reading about it, about like why it's a thing, and it's at like a local level, it's fine. It gives, these young women, or the children, these girls, confidence, and, to like get on stage and perform and stuff like that. But then once it goes past that little threshold, that's when it gets
like
weird.
national?
Yeah, the second it goes national, it's becomes about something far more entirely.
Have you ever seen that show Pageant Moms?
I've seen things about it. I've never actually watched it.
I just see those moms and I'm like, oh my God, those kids are going to have some real issues when they get older.
Toddlers and tiaras.
Yeah,
that
that's
kind
the
of
one.
thing.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask a few questions about the medical field.
Sure.
And in your work in it.
Sure.
I've heard this. Do nurses make the worst patients?
I would say not with other nurses because we're sort of more understanding and more forgiving. I know when I've been a patient, my wife's been a patient, we are really nice to the nurses. And so they're nice to us. So I would say no, but if things were not going well, if things were not being done right, God help you, because we know who to talk to and we know how things should be done. But the nice thing about nurses is, and the one thing I like about being in nursing, is that nurses are generally nice people. They want to be around other people. They want to help people. I always thought that was the advantage of being a nursing instructor. Was I had nice students. They were just nice people. They were people I was proud to know, and so I think so. I would say no. I don't think nurses make the worst.
With your back, when you are a patient,
yeah,
are you just always critiquing them constantly? Is it just in your blood now?
Not terribly. No. I also know as a nurse, there's a lot of different ways to the same end. The other thing you learn as a nurse is you don't know every specialty. And so, if I'm working in pediatric oncology, I know, everything I think I should know in that area. But when I had a meniscus surgery, I didn't know much about that. And so I trust the people that are taking care of me.
Did you get that done locally?
I did it in... it was at the near Christiana Hospital in the Orthopedic Center.
Have you ever had to pull anything out of somebody's butt?
Poop. People get impacted. That if you don't pass your stool, it dries up, turns into little rocks, and you have to do digital extraction, which is not the opposite of analog extraction. It's using your fingers to pull it out.
At first I was like, digital, and then I was like, fingers. Oh, no! I once had to help wire up a gastroenterologist, the butt doctor. And there are these jars that they have up on the wall.
That's got to be a show. And
they had all the nurses viewing the construction area. And I pulled one aside and was like, what are these jars for? And she said, poop. Poop. And
I remember... Oh. As a nursing student, I was at the VA hospital in Ellesmere, and we got a tour of the hospital, and they took us down to the morgue, and went in, and there was all these jars on the wall, and the first one I see is named, it has a label on it, says Thompson, with somebody's body part in there. So I was like, oh.
Jeez.
As long as it was, I've been more afraid if it was empty, because it was like, oh, maybe they're waiting for me to come.
Do you get desensitized to that type of stuff, that kind of morbid reality that you're faced with, or does it still shock you the same every time?
No. It's funny. You go into a little, like a professional mode where you just get focused on things and you're sort of looking things with a different eye. And then afterwards, you can get more shocked by it or break down. Like the first time I had a patient that had a code. And I went through like everything almost robotically, like you're trained to do all these steps and to do these things. And I went through it all, and then afterwards, like melted, so breaking down but while I was there,
You had to be so strong. I can only imagine.
But it's one of those things too, where I still work as a nurse by the bedside, and I still have to do things with wounds and poop and all that stuff. And it doesn't really, I wouldn't do it with you because you're not in that relationship, but when it's your patient, it's a different, it's a whole different thing. I don't get upset by it. I don't get bothered by it. If you pooped on the floor right now, I would get upset.
I would also be very upset with me.
I would have questions.
I'd be like, what trauma caused this instantaneous poop?
I'd want to know why you didn't wait until we had the video podcast.
That's a fair question, David. Can you tell me a little more about what a flight nurse is?
Sure. There's two different kinds of flight nurses. The most common one are the acute flight nurses that fly, not cute, like acute.
We have this cat. She'll be taking care of you.
that fly trauma victims. So if you're on 95 and you have an accident they can't drive you to the hospital, they fly you. Well, that's what most flight nursing is. It's a very quick ride. You stabilize the patient as best you can on the way to the hospital.
So essentially like a paramedic.
Very much so, with a lot of trauma skills on how to take care of people who have just experienced trauma. There's a thing called the golden hour, where you have 1 hour from the time that you're in the worst of accidents. If you can get to a trauma care center, you have a very high chance of surviving. And so that's why they use the helicopters, and that's what the flight nurses are trained to do. Those are in rotary aircraft, helicopters. The kind of flight nursing I did was in fixed wing, which was a C-130.
The obtuse nursing.
Okay, yes. So yes, I've been described that way many times. And I would go in. After the patients are stabilized, you then move them, and they fly for hours and hours and hours. Like there was one time I had to fly a patient from Oman to the Fleet Hospital in the UAE, and it was a 5 or 6 hour flight.
Is there something that you learned as a flight nurse that you wouldn't have learned otherwise?
As a flight nurse, as far as the nursing care itself, the reality is that it's, the care that you can give is very minimal in the aircraft. It's really keeping people, just keeping them stable, which is a little different from the nursing care that I was used to, where you're giving lots of medications and you're dealing with a lot of patient teaching and doing a lot of things that are way beyond tasks. So it's a very different type of nursing that you do there. So so what I learned was things like when you take a blood pressure, you can't use your stethoscope because you can't hear anything. So you use your fingers. You pump up the pump, and then you release it. And when you feel the pulse, then you know that that's your systolic blood pressure.
Whenever I have my blood pressure taken, they could say any number in the world, and I would be like, probably good. And they say good every time, so I don't worry, but it could be like 1,000/2, and I'd be like, that's probably fine.
I'll give you a lesson on blood pressure after the recording.
But you're right. I actually just got my blood pressure checked the other day, and she just gives me the numbers such and such over such and such. I'm like, oh, great.
Well, that's and that brings up a good point, in that too many people in medicine use jargon, use numbers, and don't explain things and assume that people know, because that's one of the things that happens. You were asking me about, just getting used to things. You get used to those numbers. So you look at the numbers and you say, okay, fine, and you go on, and you don't realize sometimes you need to explain in detail. And even if I gave you the two numbers and said, okay, they're okay, do you actually know what they mean? No. Most people do not. So
nursing seems to be this interesting mix of technical and medical skills, but with this combination of almost like customer service skills.
Yeah, it's actually described as an art and science. Nursing is an art and science, because you have to have to be a good nurse is not to just be technically proficient. You also have to be somebody who can have empathy. You have to have a high emotional intelligence, where you can try to see how people are feeling. You don't want to get in a situation where you're walking out of a patient's room saying, everything okay? And before they can even answer, you're out the door. You don't want to be that kind of nurse. You have to be able to look at people, read the nonverbals, and know what to say in return. If a child says to you, "Am I going to die?"
Oh my God.
And that's happened to me. Ugh. How do you
say yes?
Well, do you know what the right answer is? What the best answer is?
I have to know now.
Okay.
Please tell
Crying
me.
profusely on their chest, of course.
It's something along the lines of,
I got my drink ready.
Are you concerned about dying? Or is this something that you're thinking about? And you expand to see what that is. You have to understand is sometimes when people ask you a question, they're not asking you for the answer to that question. It's part of a bigger answer. It's part of bigger questions that they're having. It's part of what their concerns are. So you have to understand, and one of the great things about, I think, being a nurse is I learned, I think, on how to listen to the meaning of what people are asking, and not just the answer. The answer, the concrete answer is yes, you're going to die. Everybody's going to die. But that's not really what's being asked, and that's the question: is what's really being asked.
While you're telling me about this, I was thinking, how do you handle somebody that just has an overall bad attitude? How do you give excellent patient care to somebody that's just being...
Well, that's what restraints are for. Just kidding.
Only kidding a little.
No, what you understand is that as a nurse, you are often meeting people at the worst day of their lives. You're meeting families whose their father's just had a stroke, a child who's just hit by a bus. I dealt with a lot of parents and children who were just diagnosed with cancer. So you're dealing with people who aren't going to be at their best. They're not going to be happy and sunny and thoughtful of your or my feelings. And so I accept that, and I don't really expect them to be. And again, you look past it and you try to empathize and saying, well, what is it? What would I be like? What would people be like in that situation? And that's how you respond. That's what helps you respond to that. I forgive, and like I said, I know when I've had parents who are very upset, and you get a lot of times you get patients who are demanding. One of the common complaints in nursing is a lot of times patients will come to a hospital and think it's the Four Seasons. And that they should have, service at their beck and call, and complain about things and that don't matter, and look past the things that do. One of the ongoing complaints right now is that a lot of effort is put in a lot of hospitals with patient satisfaction surveys. And so if you get a bad patient satisfaction survey, it can hurt you as a nurse. And I always felt that most patients, do not know about what's going on behind the scenes. So, for example, a good nurse will know before an IV runs out to go in and change the bag. And they change it, and the alarms never go off, and you may never even be aware of it. The bad nurse lets them run out, but comes in right away and changes the bag. So the bad nurse might get a better patient satisfaction because the patient saw what they did and think, oh, look at that, they're taking care of me. Where I would look at it and say, you fool, you let that bag run dry. Or, and I always think it's the same thing with like an airline pilot. You don't see all the things that go up in the cockpit. And it's the same thing with nursing. You don't know the nurse that had to argue with the physician to get the order changed that's going to make you feel better. You don't know about it. You're not aware of it at all. And so you're not even in a position a lot of times to make judgments.
That's fair. What TV show do you think best represents like life as a nurse, like at a hospital?
None. No, there's never been one, and you would never want to see one, frankly.
Do you ever watch them?
I have. They're awful.
Not even ER.
I mean, the nurses are usually either angels of mercy or whores.
Oh.
In the shows. In the shows, they either are the most wonderful, saintly people, or they're out to get, and they're usually women, and they're usually out to get a man or something. That's very true. So, yeah, most people in medicine just laugh and laugh and laugh at medical shows. You see one of the nursing Reddits, the Reddit I go to a lot is nursing. And you'll see pictures that people take of screenshots where IVs are put in backwards, and people are intubated. Instead of having it going down the throat, it's taped to the side of the mouth, and things like just crazy stuff. And so it really, when you know what's going on, it really takes you out of the show. And shows like Nurse Jackie, where she was
Eddie Falco is amazing. Don't you dare.
She's a wonderful actress, but as far as her portrayal of the nursing profession, I didn't like. But
was that the worst one? Who's the worst? Who misses the mark totally? What show? Is it Scrubs? Is it Nurse Jackie? Who is it?
I feel like
Scrubs didn't even have that many nurses. I probably Scrubs had the best nurses, I think.
right. I thought so, and there was like
They
lots
were the
of
most.
dude.
They were most of the.
nurses.
They were probably the most human of the nurses. The worst of the shows, where you never even see the nurses, and the physicians are the ones who are doing all the care, and it's like they don't do that. You know?
What do these nurses got to do now?
Right? Yeah.
My guilty pleasure in life is Grey's Anatomy. I love it. It's mindless TV that I know can't even close to being reality, and I'm just like, yes, of course.
That's probably one of the best examples of where the nurses are totally in the background.
I was going to say, that's what I thought you were going to say, because they are never even once mentioned. You know, two nurses' names.
Yeah, after the first season, I turned it off and have never watched it since. But
And these surgeons are giving such they're like by these patients' beds, and I was like, I've had surgery twice, and I've seen the surgeon 30 seconds before I went to sleep.
yeah, they have their job, they do it well, and then they move on to the next one. You know, they don't hang around the patient's bedsides.
I have no delusions that that's true, but something about watching those doctors being absolutely ridiculous makes me feel good about my life.
Well, it also sets up unrealistic expectations. That's the other problem that we as nurses face, is that they think Dr. House is going to come and fix them, find their problem, and that, you know, all the physicians are going to hang around, and then they, why am I getting a nurse? Why aren't I getting this physician sitting by my bedside holding my hand all night?
One thing about Dr. House that I like is that he actually hates patients.
Yeah.
So I think we've teased you long enough. I think we should move on to the reason you're actually here
Sure.
to talk today, now that we've wasted enough of your time. You're actually here today to discuss the way that we learn. Mm-hmm. Can you expand on that?
Sure. I'm here to tell you that Idiocracy is a documentary. You familiar with the movie, 2006
The movie?
movie?
Yes.
Oh,
Idiocracy.
I haven't watched it for years and years, but
I recommend you watch it because I think it's scary because it's becoming a documentary, that people really are losing their ability to critically think. Mm-hmm. Another example from popular culture is, are you smarter than a fifth grader?
Oh my God. Anytime I've turned that on, I'm like, am I?
Right. And here's my answer to that. When you have that reaction, which most people do, is why are fifth graders being taught information that no adult knows or needs to know?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's my point, is that if you can understand that, you know, that these kids are being taught things that have no real meaning and that are useful information or information that they could use to memorize, that's the problem. Is the world has always been complex. It's not that, you know, we always say, oh, it's more complex today. No, it's always been complex. It's just that our ability to have access to the information that we need has been more limited. And so you had to become a specialist in some area. You had to learn lots and lots of details. You memorized lots of things so that you could be called on for your expertise. And we still have that, and we probably always will. But for a lot of the day-to-day things, you folks have already mentioned that you have gone to Reddit to find answers to questions. I go to Reddit to find answers to questions. I've fixed a lot of appliances in our house using YouTube videos.
I was just going to say that. The other day, I didn't know how to do something at my job. I didn't know how to make a 4-point offset saddle bend. Learned it on YouTube instantaneously.
Right.
Didn't have to ask nobody in the room.
Right. So you learned you've learned how to learn. And that's really what I'm asking people to do, is to, and in nursing and medicine in particular, there's been a long history of focusing and valuing memorization. That if you can memorize this, you know, all these bones and all these muscles and all these drugs, and then I soon became to realize that you will remember the things you need in life. The things you don't need, you can look up. And so, you know, going back to my biography there, one of my first research projects was to get Palm Pilots. This was an age before smartphones. With Palm
like
Pilots,
the Tom?
there was a Palm Pilot was it was, think of it like an iPod Touch, where it doesn't connect. I mean, you can download applications into it, and I think there was some rudimentary internet access, but the idea is that, for example, one of the tools on it was a drug guide. Now, traditionally in nursing education, you would have to memorize lots and lots and lots of medications and all the side effects that you could. The reality is nobody can do that. That's why they made a book that's 3 inches thick. You have to, know the drugs that you use, but every day you're going to meet a drug that you don't know. So what I started doing with my students was giving them these Palm Pilots and saying, instead of memorizing the drugs, at the beginning of the shift, you get this list of meds that your patient's going to have. I want you to look them up, and we're going to review them and think and talk about, why they're being given, and not just the facts about it, but why is this medication being given? So the other key there is context. So instead of just learning facts, and that's the thing about, are you smarter than a 5th grader? Everything is without context. And that's why the random, what's the leading export of Bolivia? It's tin. But did you ever need that? Did you ever need that information?
Never.
No, you never needed that information. But if you were interested in tin and where it came from, you could have looked it up and found it, and then you would always remember it. Because let's say you were in the tin business, you would want to know that.
There's a tin salesman who's listening to the show.
I know that's your big demographic.
It is
the tin salesman. But
I didn't learn this on the internet, and it stuck with me my whole life. The capital of Djibouti is Djibouti. It's a teeny tiny
You
country.
just like to say Djibouti.
It doesn't just like to say Djibouti.
You just like to say Djibouti.
I learned it in 6th grade. And it stuck with me ever since.
Yeah, you've been shaking your Djibouti ever since.
Ever since.
So the idea is that you learn things as you need them, and if you learn them in context, they stick. When I think back to my days in the University of Delaware 40 some years ago, I remember the things that I had to teach a patient because I had to look them up and I had to get a presentation together and I had to teach them. But all those other lectures, I'm sorry to say to those poor instructors that taught me, there's a lot of stuff they told me that I do not remember because I learned it for the test. Mm-hmm. I recorded it on a test well enough to get through, and then I promptly forgot it.
Are you saying that learning on the job is probably better?
Absolutely.
I would like to agree.
Absolutely. And that's the whole key, and that's kind of what I've been working at in my teaching and my talks with people, is that instead of giving a lecture and giving lots of facts about things, give people a situation. So instead of just saying, okay, here's diabetes and here's what it does and here's the medications that we give, you give people a situation. Oh, you've got a 12-year-old who's now very hungry, peeing all the time, and you take their blood sugar and it's 600. It should be 100, 120. Ooh. So you don't know that. So when you're new to all that, just like you said, is that what happens? So you give people a little introduction to it, but then you show them where to find the information, and so you then work through the situation. You give the students how to look up the information, how to use it, what does it mean, and you can walk them through the case. They remember it much better, and they understand what they're learning. And after they take the test, they remembered because they had to use that information and not just memorize it for a test. Our memories, there's a few people that can remember everything they learned, but most people do not. Mm-hmm. There seems to be a limited amount that we can hold on to.
And those
I push grandma's birthday out to learn all these side effects of ibuprofen.
Right.
And those people love to tell you about it, that they know a lot.
Right, and there's some situations where it is good to know a lot of information about things, and that's why I said we still need experts. And I'm not saying that we'll never memorize anything again, but what I am saying is you'll memorize the things you need to know, that you need to learn, and don't worry about trying to get people. We shouldn't in education be trying to get people to memorize just facts without context.
It makes a lot of sense. And we were talking about, are you smarter than a fifth grader? I think that framed your point very well, because these are kids that are seen as quote unquote smart kids that they're on a TV show because they've memorized random facts.
Right.
So, with all this said, how do you feel about Jeopardy?
I love Jeopardy. I do. I watch it.
We found his Achilles heel.
I watch it.
How devastated are you about Alex?
About Alex? Very. Although amazingly, it sounds like he's doing very well.
He still looks very well. I saw an episode
Well,
like 2
he's wearing
weeks
a
ago.
wig, by the way. But
I did not notice.
yeah, he is.
He is
But
looking terrible.
The other thing to remember is that those shows that you're seeing now were recorded back in March or April. So
You're right.
But the reports I've been hearing lately on our Jeopardy website subreddit is that he is doing well. So he's been getting some. There are some very intriguing new treatments that I'm sure he's getting.
He's getting the best of the best for sure, right?
But the thing with Jeopardy is it's not just memorization. I mean, you have to have good recall, and you have to be pretty good at trivia. I think James showed us the power of having a lot of trivial knowledge.
Are you talking about that guy that was winner for
James Holzhauer?
He was like on there for like 7 episodes
almost won $2 million. But
wow,
and that was really recent.
But a lot of it's also figuring out it's a bit of a puzzle. A lot of times you have to figure out the category, and it's asking for 2 words that one starts with B and one starts with C. And so, it's not just memorizing. You have to be able to have a good knowledge base.
One of the things about learning how to learn is defying ignorance. And have you noticed that people that have the most opportunity to be proven wrong are the most resistant to it? Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a thing called confirmation bias, where people only want to hear what they want to hear, and so they exclude the facts that contradict what they want to hear. There's a thing called cognitive dissonance, where people have trouble if they're given a fact that contradicts what they've heard, and they get very confused. And we see a lot of that today. One of my great concerns is the growing anti-vaccination movement.
It's a big deal.
You have people out there who are just spreading lies about it. I've been a nurse for many, many years. I've been studying it very, very closely. I would not be giving vaccinations to my children and hundreds of children if I didn't think that it was safe and effective. I also grew up in a time, that's the other thing, is we talk about being older and being new, being younger, is that I grew up in a time when measles and German measles and chickenpox and all these things were not preventable with a vaccine.
You can prevent chickenpox?
You have a chickenpox vaccine, yes.
I got the chickenpox.
Well, maybe you probably were too young to get the vaccine. The vaccine didn't come out until the late 90s.
Oh, I was going to say, excuse me, I specifically remember getting chickenpox.
Right news to me. We just missed the boat.
I actually was part of some of the trials giving the vaccine to some of my patients back in the early 90s. It was tested for years. But
that has to be the most frustrating thing. This anti-vaccination thing, and you as a nurse working with children.
Yes.
That has to be infuriating.
Yeah. And interestingly is the way vaccines work is you introduce what's called an antigen. It's the surface of a bacterium or a virus that teaches your immune system how to create the antibodies to it. That's all it does. And then your body now has learned how to respond, so when it gets the actual virus or bacterium, it will be able to create the antibodies and protect you from it.
You're essentially teaching your body to do the thing you're talking about, on-site learning.
Right. A lot of people don't understand. Right. And a lot of people don't understand even that basic part of it, and that's part of the problem. And so you have a misunderstanding of how they even work, and then they're kind of scary because there's needles. I always believed that if vaccines were just oral, that there would not be the objections that you see. The other thing is to understand is because immune systems are variable, Not everybody creates enough antibodies when they get a vaccine. So they're not 100% effective. Not everybody who gets a vaccine is going to get the full response that you're supposed to get. A lot of people don't realize that after you get a vaccine, you shouldn't take Tylenol.
Ever again?
No, right after the vaccine, because it will reduce your immune response. You're trying to teach your immune system how to respond. If you take Tylenol, it actually suppresses that. And so now you have you're less likely to develop the antibodies you need. A lot of people don't know that, and I know a lot of nurses don't teach people that. So, so that kind of thing gets out there. So the way vaccines work is that you have to have what's called herd immunity. You have to accept the fact that not everybody's going to be 100% protected. But if we have a high enough percentage, then even if the bug does get into the population, there won't be anybody to spread it to. And so that's why, for example, for most of us,
anybody that had measles
up until
before.
just a few years ago, measles was not even a thing. We started to see it. When I started to see it was actually on college campuses after spring break, because students would go down to Florida, go down to South Carolina or something, and they would encounter it, and maybe they didn't have they may have got the vaccine as a kid, but they didn't get full immunity. They then catch it because they're now caught in this little environment where they're close quarters with other people, and then they would come back to the campus, and it would spread through a dorm. Because you need to have a certain number of percentage of people that have enough immunity, and that number is is close to about 90%, a little bit better, 92%. Once you get below that, just statistically, things can start to spread. And so that's the problem. Even though most people do get their kids vaccinated, just a few people saying, no, I'm not sure about this, can create havoc among the rest of us who are vaccinated.
How do you feel about schools telling parents that they are not allowed to enroll their kids in school if they're not vaccinated?
I think it's something that's necessary.
I agree,
because
but do you like that question? Can we ask that question?
Of course we can.
Okay, I didn't know.
It's common sense at this point.
I agree.
Well, one of the things that's getting thrown in there to muddy the waters is civil liberties. Like, oh, you're making me do something against my will. How can you do that? The problem is that you become... It's
for the greater good if you get this shot.
You become dangerous. My ability to throw my fist forward is fully protected until I touch David's nose. Mm-hmm. So...
It's big. It's easy.
It's easy to hit. But,
let's use your face, though.
But my right to throw my fist stopped at that point. And it's the same thing with being unvaccinated. My right to be unvaccinated ends when I start to infect other children.
I absolutely agree.
I know kids in school that are immunosuppressed. I also, as I told you, not everybody gets full immunity even though they got the vaccines. And so when you introduce somebody into a school who hasn't been vaccinated, you create a risk to the whole population of the school. And one of the myths is that childhood diseases are harmless. And I've seen children die and maimed from chickenpox.
Really?
Yes.
You can die from the chickenpox?
You can die from the chickenpox. You can die from measles. Most of these diseases and things like German measles will leave people deaf. It will leave people infertile.
I am really getting off scot-free.
And so...
Right? We got lucky.
Yeah. But, I mean, the reality is most people get through them.
I think I never happened hanging with Germans.
But
chickenpox don't fuck around.
Most people get through them without a problem. So it's not, and that's why it's easy. It's called anecdotal. I have an anecdote that, well, I got chickenpox and I did fine, and so why are we worried about this?
People die.
Yeah, some people did die.
But most people don't know that because the numbers are small. That's the problem. The other thing is when you start getting into public health and you get into epidemiology and you start seeing bigger numbers, you start to realize that, wow, the numbers of people that die from the measles now is minuscule. But if you go back to the 1950s, you see that it was hundreds of kids per year. Now, hundreds of kids per year out of a population of, at that time, there were probably been about 40 million kids. Okay, that's still rare, but it's a whole lot more than it is now. Right now, there's about 70 million kids in the United States under 18. So, yes, the numbers are small, but people are really bad at knowing odds. Classic example is you are much more likely to die driving to Philadelphia Airport than getting on the plane and flying to Europe.
Oh, yeah.
But people don't see that. They're afraid of getting on the plane, but they're not afraid to get in the car and going down 95, and that's when they're most likely to die.
Disagree, but...
So
I am scared to get in my car still.
Okay, all right. But people are really bad at statistics. It's why the lottery succeeds, is because people are really bad at understanding that 1 in 275 million means that you will not win.
The whole casinos exist. The whole casino industry is based off bad math.
Exactly.
I gambled once and I haven't gambled ever again. It made me so mad I'm not doing it.
You've saved yourself a lot of money.
I spent $50 in one. I don't know why. I was like, if I spend $50, I'm totally going to get something. And I didn't. And I was like, well, fuck the casino.
You've heard of literacy. Well, there's also there was a Temple professor that wrote a book called Numeracy, where he talks about how people are illiterate about numbers and odds in particular. And so people are really bad at that. And that's where some of this information, I think, with the vaccines come in. It's that people are really bad at figuring out, yes, the chances of something happening bad with a vaccine are about 1 in 3 million. But the chances of something happening bad with getting the disease are much higher. But we're really bad at that math.
What could happen, with the vaccine? I assume that people could be allergic to it and die. I assume that that's like the big one.
The issue is that some people, a lot of people will have what's called a localized reaction. You get a rash, you get sore, or something like that.
That doesn't sound so bad to me.
Some people will consider that an injury. But my feeling is if it passes and you have no long-term problem, that's not that's not a problem.
It's a side effect.
I'm glad we're on the topic of vaccines. Can you explain to me the flu shot?
Okay, the flu shot is interesting because
why does that not work sometimes?
The big problem with the flu is that there's always a different flu. Every year, the virus changes the surface of it, and it always changes, and it's always different. And in order to make a vaccine, you have to then find that virus that's going around, multiply it, create a vaccine, and then get it out to the whole population before it starts spreading around the world. And it goes around and around the world and constantly mutating. And so there is usually 3 or 4 different viruses that have to be identified, and they have to create a vaccine, and then they have to get it out to the population. And it usually spreads in the wintertime in your hemisphere. So in our hemisphere, that's in the fall and October. And so that's what they're trying to do is to get that. Now, the other problem is not everybody, the rates of vaccination are very low. Only, I think 20 to 30% of people actually get vaccinated. So that means it goes around a lot more compared to like measles, where you've got, like here in Newcastle County, we probably have at least 85% of the population is vaccinated.
Oh, I was going to say, what? They have measles?
So that makes it a lot harder to get the measles, but it's easy to get the flu. The other problem with the flu is that because it's something that you're likely to get through and not have a problem at your age. As you get older, you start getting pneumonias and other complications and things that kill people. And so, so you don't get the flu shot, and you're like, okay, maybe you'll get the flu and you'll have a couple of bad days, and then you go back to work. But if you go to visit grandma in the nursing home, you've now killed grandma and her roommate. Poor grandma. So that's the other issue with the vaccination. So people could say, well, I'm okay if I don't get it. The problem is you are putting other people at risk.
I see. All right.
So go get it. The other thing is it's really free. You can, if you look around, you can get it for free. So it's not like we're asking people to spend money on it.
New thing. Every year I get it. Does that protect me from that strand forever?
No.
All right.
Well, because the strains change.
But if I had
if that particular strain came around again and
forever,
and you
a long time,
a long time.
Fair enough. Sold.
Yeah, there's controversies because it's hard to test. I mean, unless you start going around and injecting you with the virus and seeing how you respond. They do a thing called titers, which Titers. You draw them out in the blood. That's really funny. Okay.
Titers in the blood.
It's a titer, which is a measurement of the amount of something. A titer is a measure of the amount of something in chemistry. And so you measure.
Potatoes, my friend.
Do you need to step outside?
Yeah. I'm sorry, but you have spuds in your blood.
We're actually not adults.
I didn't say taters. I said titers. Titers.
I heard taters.
Well, and I thought you said, what did I think you said?
I'm not sure.
Instead of abortion, I thought you said award shows.
I thought Wheel of Fortune was Jeopardy.
So we're even. So we're even now. No, so what they're doing is measuring the number of antibodies that you have. And so you can see if somebody supposedly has immunity to something based on their titers. Titers. Titers.
My family's from Elkton, so I still hear taters. Titers.
Titers.
I like mashed titers.
Mashed taters.
Somebody pointed out to me the other day that I use D's in place of T's often.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joe was like, can you say the word Baltimore for me? And I
Baltimore.
was like, Baltimore? And he
Yeah.
was like, no, Baltimore. And I was like, oh.
Don't they say Baltimore down there?
It's Baltimore.
Just Baltimore?
It's Baltimore.
I remember we've talked about this before, but the way we say water.
Fuck you in the water situation.
She hates it.
Well, I grew up saying water.
There's a
water.
story.
In Philadelphia, you say water.
You
That's how
know,
I
he
grew up.
went out of his way to say water for a whole month just to piss me off.
I did.
And finally I was like, why are you doing that? You know that's fucking awful. And he's like, just to make you mad.
Is that why we went to McDonald's and you're like, can I have a water?
Yeah, I
And
was
she's
practicing.
Like, what?
Yeah. That's the whole reason I did it.
Well, I remember in college, I spent a summer in Colorado at a VA hospital working there as a nursing student. And my Philadelphia accent was the butt of many jokes, and I tried to change it.
Well, I think we are just about, we kind of want to start wrapping things up. But
Sure.
we do have a little surprise for you. We
Okay.
want to play a little bit of a game.
Okay.
What I have here is a little quiz.
All
It
right.
is called What Is in My Mouth.
What is what?
What is in my mouth? That's the name of the game. It's not, but
We turn off all the lights and play Who's in My Mouth.
Goodbye. Drive safely, everybody.
What I have here, because we're talking about critical thinking.
Yeah.
And so what I have is I have a list of 5 logical fallacies.
Oh, no.
And I'm a huge fan of logical fallacies, so I'm going to let you know I did run with this a little bit, and I apologize in advance. So I'm going to give you 5 logical fallacies, and then I'm going to give you 5 definitions, and I just want to see if you can match them up.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to give you, so these are the 5 logical fallacies. I have a list that you can have, so you don't have to remember them. The
That'll
fallacies.
make me look bad.
Ad hominem, straw man, false dichotomy, proof surrogate, equivocation.
Okay.
These are all fallacies. That's your list.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad I get to look at them.
So here's the first definition. Let's see if you can figure this out. A claim masquerading as proof or evidence when no such proof or evidence is actually being offered. I have examples for all of them except for this one. So we didn't want to make it too easy.
Say it again, please.
All right.
And can you put it in the...
can you put it in the form of a question?
I know. I sucks. I forgot to get an example for this one. A claim masquerading as proof or evidence when no such proof or evidence is actually being offered.
So just stating my opinion.
Essentially, yeah, stating your opinion is fact.
Stephen King is the best writer on the planet. There it is.
Well, I've never heard of proof surrogate. I don't know what that is. I don't know.
just
I
want to
know what
guess.
I know what the other 4 are, but I don't know what proof surrogate is.
Okay, so kind of by process of elimination there.
Yeah.
You think that might that
It
your final
sounds,
answer?
since it doesn't seem to me to match the other definitions that you're talking about.
Okay. That is correct. You are on the
Okay.
board.
Okay.
I should also mention the wager of this.
Oh.
If you get 3 questions correct,
Yeah.
then me and Morgan actually have to take an additional shot at the end of the
Okay.
show. If you
Okay.
don't, then you have to take an additional shot.
Okay.
As 61 years old, and we are now forcing you to do this.
Okay.
At noon.
A PhD. But you're off to a good start. You're already on the board.
Okay.
Question 2. Substituting a person's actual position or argument with a distorted, exaggerated, or misrepresented version of the version of the position of the argument.
Straw man.
Easy. He's on. That's 2 for 2. Well, we're fucked.
He made this quiz.
Number 3. When only 2 choices are presented, yet more exist. So like a black and white argument.
False dichotomy.
Easy. God damn it. Not even thinking of you.
You want to keep going?
I mean, sure, why not? And you were scared at the beginning of this. You were screwing with us, you son of a bitch.
I don't like how she's already coming over, taking our glasses. She's already decided we're defeated.
So what do you want?
Bourbon, I guess.
I guess.
Yeah. Abby, our wonderful PA today.
Ta-da!
Question 4.
Mm-hmm.
Claiming the argument is flawed by pointing out that the one making the argument is not acting consistently with the claims of the argument.
Ad hominem.
Oh, fuck you.
Is that essentially telling the other person you're dumb?
Essentially.
A lot of times that's what's used. Yeah, as an ad hominem. They'll say, well, you're just a poopy head. So
I'll have to use that as a point next time.
Yeah. Listen here, poopy head.
Look here. Mr. Poopy Butthole.
And just to clear the board, obviously the last one, by process of elimination, using an ambiguous term in more than one sense, thus making the argument misleading.
equivocation.
Absolutely. Very well done. Cleared the board. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, before we leave today,
Yes.
is there anything that you would like to tell the people about critical thinking, or even about your nursing practice that you just want to tell the people so they know and stop asking you?
Do you get asked lots of questions
I would say,
when people find out you're a nurse?
Yes.
I was
Yeah.
going to say, I
Yeah.
still to this
Can you
day
look at
call
this
my mom.
weird welt for me?
Sure.
I call my mom all the time. I have a weird thing on my leg. I'm going to send you a picture. Can you look at it and tell me what it is,
If you can
please?
afford it. What do I want people to know is learn to learn. Don't just, one of the things like on Reddit very often is you see people asking questions that you could have Googled it yourself.
Yes.
And found the answer. And I would say start learning how to search. Learn, and also when you do your search, don't click on the first thing you see, but also learn how to evaluate the results. Look through and saying, is this taking me to, because the Google will tell you where it's going to take you. Is this going to a commercial site, or is it going to something that is from a government site, a CDC site, for example, when it comes to medical information?
Yeah. Are they selling you something? Is it a credible source?
Right. So if it's sending you to some homeopathic medicine site, or is it sending you to the CDC, go to the CDC first and make your, so don't just click on things because Google told me to.
You can trust the government when it comes to medicine?
Start to make, yes, because the what you see posted on there has been extremely well vetted. There's a lot of research and literature, and usually years of things have to be shown before they put it up there. So that's a pretty good place to start with your information. So learn how to search for things, learn to have some judgments. Mm-hmm. Don't just accept, be a skeptic. But that doesn't mean, for example, with the anti-vaccine, sure, be a skeptic, but don't just go to Jenny McCarthy for your information.
Oh, Jenny McCarthy too?
Yeah, Jenny,
God damn it. Is nothing sacred? So
go to the sites that give the facts and then when you see people that say, well, that's a lie or something, saying, well, why are you saying that? What's behind that? And very often I find, one of the things I lurk at is the vaccine sites. There's a Reddit, going back to Reddit, where it says "Vax happened," where people post things that anti-vaccination people say. So it's usually like, I refused my vaccinations and the nurse applauded me in the emergency room.
Yeah.
And we say "Vax happened."
Yeah.
That means that did not, we don't really believe you.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't believe that. Or
Right,
that nurse is
right.
dumb.
Oh,
Right.
there's a great subreddit for you called r/quit your bullshit, then you'd love as well.
So the idea is just don't go to those, anti sources. And because what I find is when I look at their arguments, they usually have things that are just not true. So for example, one of the things that they say is there's thimerosal which is a ethyl mercury preservative that was used in a lot of vaccines as a preservative. It's now only used in multi-dose flu vaccine. People haven't gotten it for years. So for years it was blamed on autism. People saying, "Oh, it's the thimerosal that was causing the autism." Well, it's been out of vaccines for 18 years now.
It happened to me.
So so we know
Chicken pox.
Cheers to chicken pox.
So you have people now who still complain about something that's no longer there. So my argument back to them is, if you're going to use correlation and causation and mix those two up, then when they took it out and people say, well, autism rates have risen, then I guess the thimerosal was actually preventing autism.
Oh, right.
So be careful about your arguments.
I also think that autism rates are up because people are getting their kids checked out more often. I think that's the thing.
We could go another hour on this, but the reason is that
what are you doing next weekend?
The definition. I'll come back.
New podcast.
The definition of autism has really expanded, and it's understood a lot better now. And the other thing is that you get services as a child in school if you have an autism diagnosis. So it's actually now we're getting a better picture of what is there's actually they actually don't even use the word autism anymore. They say spectrum. You're on the autistic spectrum. And so it's a whole series of things. There's like 3 columns of things, and you have to have one from here and one from there and one from there. And it has to affect your life. And if you have all of that, then you're on the spectrum. You have a lot of things that are spectrum adjacent that look like autism but are not. So anyway, the bottom line is you have a lot of people who are now being diagnosed that have it. People that were previously diagnosed are now labeled with something else, but people are looking for it. And so that's a big part of it. The other thing is people throw out statistics. Oh, it used to be 150, and now it's 1 in 100, and now it's 1 in 80, and they think, well, that means that all kids are going to get autism. Ooh, hold back. 1 in 150 means what? 0.5%. 1 in 100 means 1%. 1 in 80 means 1.8% or something. So it's not like the population is now all going to be autistic. It just means that we're now identifying the tiny portion of the population that has it. So a lot of people misunderstand numbers, misunderstand statistics.
Do you think that's where the whole crisis is? People just not understanding numbers?
Yeah, it goes back to my innumeracy problem, where people don't understand statistics. They don't understand risk. They don't understand what a percentage is, what that means.
And then going back to David's thing, people are scared of being wrong, essentially.
It's an emotional thing, where the second that there's a logic didn't put that viewpoint in them, so you can't use logic to pull them out of it. It's an emotional thing. They feel a certain way because of something else entirely, and that's what then they do. They're using this crazy belief and they're projecting that as a way to protect themselves on something they can't deal with.
It's a good point. And especially when you get downvoted for having the incorrect response.
Those 2 downvotes really got to you, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. I'm still stewing about them. So you have people.
My cat's fucking cool, guys.
I like my cat, and I don't care what you say. But you have people who, I think it's a really good point. I hadn't thought about it so much before, but if you're afraid of being wrong, which brings back to if you have facts behind you, then go ahead. But also be willing that if somebody refutes those facts, look at the validity of those facts and say,
maybe I was wrong.
Maybe I was wrong and I can change. But it gets back to that confirmation bias. If you're only listening to the things you want to listen to, if you're only looking at the sites, then you're just getting, it's called the echo chamber. Yes. You're only listening to what you want to hear and not listening to what the other side is saying.
And some people can't accept that they might be wrong. Like somebody actually saying the words "I was wrong," or even just thinking that, they can't handle that. So they always have to be right, and they will defend that idea to the end.
Well, it really hurts your self-esteem, you know, and it gets back to education where you were criticized for being wrong, for giving a wrong answer instead of, you know, saying, oh, you know, that wasn't right. Let's try it a different way. You lost points. You were flunked. You were, you know, so people see being wrong as being a failure or a sin even.
Yeah. Ooh. Getting religious over here.
Praise the Lord.
Behind.
What?
It's a different one.
Laheim.
I was just teasing.
Do I need to spell that for you too?
Yeah. Well, Brent Thompson.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming on the show with
You're
us today.
very
We are
welcome.
just about out of time.
I had a great time here.
We had a great time having you. We'll have to have you back on as our medical expert, or at least our
Sure.
critical thinking expert.
Sure.
Whenever we have a question.
Anytime.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you very much for listening to the Maximum Mediocrity podcast. Think critically about everything and vaccinate your fucking kids. Have
Wear a
great night.
condom.
Wear a condom.
Angels of mercy or whores.